Hi everyone, welcome back to This Book Belongs to Pam. Today, you and I are going to go and plan a whole month worth of reading. AKA deciding what my TBR pile stack list is going to be for February. I already have a couple of books that I want to read in February because those are part of my Magical Readathon TBR. If you haven't watched my TBR video, I will link that in the cards. I have 2 books that I have to read for the Magical Readathon, so I'm just looking at my list down here. And one of them is Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam. And this one is, I guess it's like a fiction thriller suspense. And I'm reading it for the read a book set in a city/town prompt. So if you're not familiar with this book, although it's quite popular, I believe, and I think a lot of people have already read it, we have Amanda and Clay who went to a remote part of Long Island. They booked a place to just, have a staycation, but then suddenly the power goes out, there's like a media blackout, a power blackout, and a couple knocks on their door saying that they're actually the owners of the place and that they need to stay there because of the whole thing that's happening. So you have these 2 families that are living in the same place and they're not quite sure if they believe each other because there's no way to verify, there's no internet, no anything. So that's Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam. That's definitely one of the books that I'm going to be reading this month. And then the next book that I need to read is a red cover book, which I actually already have one. I was reading The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, but I DNF'd that. I'll say more about that in my January wrap up or in my Magical Readathon vlog. So I'm gonna be replacing that with Where Dreams Descend by Janella Angeles. So this is a fantasy romance, YA fantasy romance, I believe. So I am very intrigued. I don't think I've read a YA fantasy romance. I've read a lot of YA fantasy with like romance subplots, but not really just fantasy romance. So I'm super excited to read that. I think what got me interested in Where Dreams Descend was that it was described sort of like a Moulin Rouge, Phantom of the Opera, like love child. That's how I remember it in my head, and that's why I put it on hold in the library. And it says here that you have a city that is covered in ice, and you have a group of magicians facing off to become the headliner of the conquering circus. And then there's this unseen danger threat that's striking behind the scenes. So that's super interesting for me. Very excited to read this one. Okay, so those are my 2 Magical Readathon TBRs. I do have a couple more books that are not really required. They're optional. If I have time, I might read them. Now I have to check my Libby account to see which books I have on hold, which books I have already borrowed, and the due dates. Because I usually decide my TBR depending on the due date. And usually what I do is I go to my shelf, I go to my loans, and I arrange it by June next. So here the first one is Trick Mirror. I've already started actually reading this book. I started it yesterday. I'm not like far ahead. I've already started the first essay. So this is a collection of essays and it's all about figuring out more of yourself and what you think of yourself, kind of the things that you tell yourself, and sort of how the internet and media plays a role in that. So it's super interesting so far. I really like Gia Tolentino's writing, and I think I'm gonna love this book. I've already highlighted so many passages, even in just the introduction. So I'm curious which essay is gonna be my favorite. And then this one, The Unkindness of Ravens by M.E. Hillard, is also part of the Magical Readathon TBR. But I don't think I'm gonna get to it this month. It's not a requirement in the TBR. It's just optional. I am super interested with this book. I've been wanting to read this for quite a while, but I think I will let the loan renew and read this again maybe in March, or if I have more time by the end of February. And then I have Anxious People by Fredrik Bachmann. I've heard a lot of good things about this book, but I haven't really read what this one is about. So I think there was like a bank robbery, or was it a bank robbery? There's a bank robber who takes a group of strangers hostage. So I think that's quite an interesting take on, anxiety, and it's something that I've been wanting to read for a while. A lot of people have also given this book high praises, so I'm excited to read that. So this one I already talked about, Leave the World Behind. And then for this one, I have two books here, Our Violent Ends and Once Upon a Broken Heart. This one is the second book in the These Violent Delights series. The reason why I wanted to read Our Violent Ends was because the ending and the cliffhanger in These Violent Delights was very interesting for me. I was super shocked, and not really shocked, but I was like impressed by the cliffhanger, so I wanted to read the second book, and hopefully the second book will be a lot better for me and a lot more enjoyable for me to read. And then Once Upon a Broken Heart, they said that this was not really a prequel, but like this lives in the same world as Caraval, but I haven't read Caraval yet, and I'm not sure if I'm gonna read that. So those are a lot of books already. I am going to read more on the synopsis of each of the books here and sort of figure out which one I do want to read. And before I do that, I'm gonna go on a quick coffee intermission because I haven't had my caffeine today, and it's already 1:46 in the afternoon, so that is abysmal. So let's go get coffee. Now that we are properly caffeinating, so good, I want to talk about the next book that I want to read, which is actually a physical book, which I'm super happy about because I very rarely get to read physical books. And this time, I'm gonna be reading si Jana Silang at ang Labanang Manananggal Mambabarang. So this is the second book in the Jana Silang series. This is a Filipino authored book, and it's also written in Filipino by Edgar Calabia Samar. And I'm super excited to read this because it is one of my goals to read, one, more Filipino authored books, and two, books that are written in Filipino. My Filipino is very weak, and I want to change that by reading more books that are written in Filipino. So for this one, this is the second book in the series. The first one, I don't want to spoil it, but the first one, which I also have here, si Jana Silang at ang Tiyanak ng Tabon. The first one ended on a really tragic note. I'm not gonna spoil it for anyone. It ended on a really tragic note, and then immediately followed by something that's a bit more hopeful. You know, sort of like a preview of the next step in his journey. So Jana Silang is a high school kid, and he loves playing this game called Tala Online. It's an MMORPG, a massive multiplayer online role-playing game. So in this game, you have to defeat Filipino folklore creatures that are the bosses of each level, and then each level gets progressively harder, and he's pretty good at the game, so he's set to win this competition. But then in that competition, sort of qualifying game, everyone in the computer shop, so in the Philippines we have this computer like rooms, computer shops where you can pay per hour to play games. So in that computer shop, everyone dies except for him. Everyone, his friend, his like enemies, everyone dies in the real world. So that was quite a shock, and it was in the news. They don't know what caused the death and everything. So he is the only one spared, and he doesn't know why. He looks like a suspect. So now he goes on to this journey of figuring out what the heck happened. Is this related to the game Tala Online? Why was I spared? So that was sort of his thought process in the first book. And then I guess in the second book, we're probably going to be fighting a different kind of Filipino folk creature, the Manananggal Mambabarang. And I'm super excited to read this, to know more about my own country, my own language, and my own folk stories. So definitely this is something that I want to read for February. I will check back in my wrap up to see how I like this one. The next book that I'm planning on reading for February is also part of the Magical Readathon. It's Tokyo Ueno Station by Yu Miri. In this book, Kazu, our main protagonist, is dead. So that is literally the first line of the synopsis. And he is hunting this park near Tokyo Ueno Station. I've actually been to that station, so this kind of feels a little bit eerie in that sense that I actually know the place, the park that he's hunting. So he hunts that park because he sort of started his life there. He went there to work as a laborer for the 1964 Tokyo Olympics, to create all of the stadiums and everything. And he's very unsatisfied with his life because he had his fair amount, or actually unfair amount of bad luck. And then he also experienced a 2011 earthquake, tsunami in Japan that really devastated a lot of people. And then shortly after that, it was followed by the announcement of the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. So he was very enraged by that because I imagine that he must be one of the people who were very adversely affected by the earthquake. And then hearing that the government is planning to spend taxpayers' money on the Olympics, on other Olympics, it just, it doesn't sit right when there are a lot of people who are still living in these homeless areas around the Tokyo Olympics, the 1964 Olympic locations. So that is sort of the setting that we find ourselves into. I find this very interesting because the 2020 Olympics has passed already, and there are a lot of issues with it in terms of, should it be held because of the pandemic. That sort of adds up to the experience of reading this book, because that even before the pandemic happened, there were already a lot of people outraged by the announcement of the 2020 Olympics. So leading up to it, we find ourselves in a global pandemic that's also affecting everyone. It affects the more disadvantaged people the most. Those are the kind of thoughts that I have right now as I read the synopsis, which is why I really want to get to this book, even though it's a optional reading for my Magical Readathon. I still think I will read this book. I hope I like it because the covers are amazing and I want to add it to my bookshelf. By the way, if you haven't watched my bookshelf organization video, I will link that up in the cards. So the next book that I plan to read is Perfect on Paper by Sophie Gonzalez. This book was recommended to me by someone on Instagram when I was asking for recommendations for books with bisexual main characters. So the premise is interesting. Our main girl is Darcy, and she's really good at giving you relationship, love advice, but she's very bad at taking those advice herself. So that's her thing. So she has this sort of dating advice column thing where people can send her letters through this locker and she writes back. One day, this guy named Alex caught her in the act of fishing out all of the letters from the locker, so he knows her identity now. And because she has this reputation in real life that she's not really good at dating, it sounds so weird for her to be like a dating advice columnist. So in exchange for Alex keeping her secret, Alex hires Darcy to be her personal dating coach. So that's super interesting. And knowing that this is about a bisexual MC, I'm assuming there's gonna be some sparks either with the guy or the girl. The last book that I read with a bisexual MC was Red, White, and Royal Blue, and I really enjoyed that. So I'm excited to dive into another one. I think we've got all of the books planned and figured out, but let's sit down and summarize everything that we've discussed and all of my books to read for February. We did it! We planned a whole month of reading, and I just want to organize it, summarize it into a list because I do need to read them in somewhat of a specific order since I borrowed them all from the library. They have due dates, so I need to sort of figure out which one I need to read first. So the first on the list is Trick Mirror by Gia Tolentino. And then next, if I want to read it, it's The Unkindness of Ravens by Emmy Hillard. Then I have Anxious People by Fredrik Bachmann. And Leave the World Behind by Ruman Alam. This one I'm not too sure yet. I want to read one book between Our Violent Ends by Chloe Gong, the second book in the These Violent Delights series. Or I could read Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. I'm only going to pick one of those two because I want to read Jano Silang at Ang Labanang Manananggal Mambabarang by Edgar Calabria Samar. This is the only physical book that I'm reading this month, so I do want to get to it. And then I have to go and read Where Dreams Descend by Janella Angeles. If I have time or if I want to, I'll read Tokyo Ueno Station by Yu Miri. And finally, Perfect on Paper by Sophie Gonzalez. So that is my entire TBR for February. It's a lot of books. There's like 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 10 books on this list. But like I said, I'm only choosing between Our Violent Ends and Once Upon a Broken Heart. So there's technically just 9. But I'm still not sure if I'm going to read that. I'm probably just going to read about 7 of those. That's usually my reading speed, like 6 or 7 books a month. But February is also a shorter month, so maybe 5.
There's me negotiating with my TBR that I created myself.
So that is it for this video. If you are reading the same books that I'm reading, please let me know in the comments and let me know why you added those to your TBR pile. I'm super curious about what piques other people's interest with books. I guess I'll see you in the next video. Bye!